Well, hello, and welcome to my cellar. Before I get into the meat of the evening, I want to give a little shout out to a friend of mine. Has a little company called Fat Dragon Games. Name's Tom Tullis. Now, those of you that are frequent users of Facebook know that Tom puts the cur in Curmudgeon. But he's a great guy, and he's got a great company, Fat Dragon Games. I first became acquainted with him several years ago when, at the end of a Gen Con, he gave me a packet of paper terrain, cut and fold and paste buildings and such, and I was fascinated by it. And thought, wow, what a great way to do inexpensive tabletop stuff. And now he does some of the best 3D printing programs, whatever you call it when you buy the rights to make something with a 3D printed set of instructions. Some of the best in the business. They're supportless, so they have less flash and stuff like that. Really, really great stuff. And he does YouTube videos to show how to do his things and paint them and what have you. And his 3D stuff is available through Drive-Through RPG. So I'm going to hold up 3 addresses here, and you can copy one or none or all of them. But anyway, no, Tom's not paying me for this. He's done nice things for me, and so I decided I'd do him a plug. I'm not kidding you. These are really, really great. I'm trying to get it focused. Sorry for the woo. There, I think it's focused. Fat Dragon Games. All you got to do is look it up, either online or go to Drive-Through RPG and find it. His stuff is exquisite, both his paper printed goods and his 3D printed plastic stuff. I can't wait till he finishes the sculpts on his lizard men, because he's promised me a set. Okay, hope you, if you do go to his site and decide to get something, let him know I sent you, okay? All right. Clearing up one of my comments from last time. Orange Spine refers to when TSR changed the cover art on the first edition rulebooks about the time that Monster Manual 2 was published. Okay, thank you. I'm not that much into the collecting scene. For instance, I don't have the knowledge that a bunch of the guys in the Achaeum, or Acium as some pronounce it, have. They are the ultimate collectors, and can tell you by the shape of the staples which printing it was. And I wasn't there when Monster Manual 2 came out, so that would explain why I didn't know it. Not that I'm making excuses for myself. Can you explain the process of making magical traps? The craft of traps is a complex ratio of mechanics and sometimes magic. Well, I can tell you how I treat them in my world. If you want to get a really good trap, like we'll say something to go on a lock on a chest. In my world, you would go to find the gnomes. In my world, the gnomes are the artificers of the small, intricate clockwork things. That's what they excel at, their little fingers getting in there and doing it. And, of course, there are no magic users, whether or not they make themselves known to the greater world, which means I have no idea whether there's allowances for no magic user player characters, but it doesn't matter. These are NPCs. In any event, that's what I would do. I would go there. If you wanted to, again, traps, in terms of dungeon exploring, traps are already there. So who put them down isn't that material to the story. Whoever built this horrible thing that you're exploring could have had flunkies who ensorcelled these various pits and disguised them or whatever. Did it themselves. I don't know. You can make up any rationale there that you'd like. And yes, it's part mechanics and part magic. The magic can take many kinds of, many forms. It can be some kind of seeming, meaning it doesn't look like it. Could hide it. Could mask the fact that it has magic in it. There's infinite possibilities there that you could explore, I believe. Anyway, that's how it works in my world. If you want a good magic trap, you want something that, a safe, a lockbox that can't be opened, whether magical or not. In my world, you go to the gnomes. That's the master craftsman in my world. Dwarves are all about digging underground and making bigger steam cannon type stuff. And the gnomes are the little tinkerers and that. And also, you can find the occasional gnome jeweler who is quite good. In my world, Makanda. When using a hex map, various editions of D&D recommend everything from 1 mile per box up to 24 miles or more. I've long used a 6-mile hex, but lately research into movements of armies has me considering a 1-mile scale for more precise tracking. What is your experience and opinions on hex maps and the scale they use? Well, like graph paper, how big an area are you going to represent? I have graph paper that is enormous. I mean, bigger. I have to slide back to show you how big it is. It's about this long, and it's about that wide. And I've had it for years and years and years, and the top sheets are kind of yellow now. But if you wanted to do them, and it's small it's small squares, so you could plot out a mega city or a mega dungeon on it. I wouldn't use it unless I was going to do something really big like that. Same thing with how I'd scale my hexes. I'm assuming you're talking about outdoors, because we don't really use them inside. So it would be how many rolls for random monsters, how much stuff do you want them to explore? You're trying to compress this, you're trying to make it an ordeal, you're trying to make it an overseas trek, an overland trek. I think you should be flexible in your scaling so that you can get what you're going for on the fewest pieces or the smallest piece of paper possible. But that's my ethic, okay? That's the way I do it. I don't want, and I had great big fold out maps back in the day, and oh, what a pain. What a pain. When I could have used a smaller scale and had half as many. But when you're tracking armies in a campaign where you're maneuvering armies against each other, I would definitely not use anything more than about a 2 mile to a hex, because you want to be able to show where your units are, not just where your army is. I don't know, 1 to 2,400, 1 to 48. I don't know what that would be exactly. It would depend on the size of whether it's a 1-inch hex or a 5/8. It all depends. But scale shouldn't be a hang-up. Scale should be whatever works for you most conveniently. And keep in mind that if you have an overland travel rate, once again, I'll cite the Knights of the Dinner Table. I can't remember when. At one point, They've been playing for 4.5 hours and they made it through 3 hexes. Well, it's a balance. Whatever works for you, but don't let it hang up on you. If you want to track armies on a 1 mile scale, do it. By all means, do it. All right, now I've got one here that is actually something that I saw on Facebook, and I know this gentleman, we've corresponded before, and so I said, put that over on a comment on my curmudgeon and I'll address it. And that's the idea that he wants to start a new campaign, which I think, and all right, let me phrase this. He's planning to start a new campaign where the PCs are all part of the local constabulary. I think it's a brilliant idea. I think it's rife with possibilities. And they don't even all have to be lawful good. In fact, they would probably be better played as all true neutrals. And you don't want to overload the thing with paladins. But having said that, okay, how would I go about doing it? Well, the first thing I would do was I would get a hold of the largest city maps I could find. Something drawn professionally, not, And if it is something professional and you don't want to do that, we'll turn it the other way and change the compass rose and, whatever you want. Ideally, a copy of the City-State of the Invincible Overlord. It's huge. But any big city. Now, if they're going to be hired as the local constables, arm twisters, jawbreakers, whatever, it's only logical that they would know the upper level of the city very well. All right, so there's no secrets up above. They have the upper level. Give them a copy of the map of the city. Because, they'd have it hanging in the station house, more or less. The maps of the municipal sewers would be known. Ways to get around underneath the city. Those would be known from the city records, also hanging on the wall. So what I'm establishing in here is that the PCs are going to know the city well. They're going to know the legitimate areas of the Undercity. What they're not going to know is every nefarious thing that's going on. They're not going to know about the hidden or the thought to have been collapsed areas underground. They're not going to know about the stuff that's never been discovered underground, some sleeping horror, whatever. But now you, as the DM, you've got your city, you've got your constables. This is just rife with hooks. Go back to the very first Phineas Fingers cartoon strips in the Dragon, when the city, which was never named, was run basically by the Thieves Guild, which were all hobbits, as it happened. Get some of the Thieves Guild stories if you can get them. Find a copy of them. Read them. Read some of the Fafford and the Mauser where it's more urban. And let new ideas sink in, because you're not planning out something that's an overland trek and a huge crawl. You are giving them make it a cop show, a formula show, murders, muggings, whatever. You can give them anything. Give them investigations that they can investigate. Several years ago, I ran an ad hoc scenario where something had been stolen that they were responsible for having been the guards. They were responsible, and so they went out all over the city asking questions. And encourage your PCs to do the same. They'd probably go in pairs, so you can allow them to split up. Some of the standard dungeon crawling rules wouldn't apply. Splitting up the party's fine. They wouldn't all troop around in a group of 7 anyway. So in this case, you can have split parties. If you've got a group of 6 or 7, split them into 2 parties. Give them each different things to go look at. Have them ask each different questions. Have them, you can do any kinds of random encounters you want while they're out trekking through the city, investigating, looking for clues, keeping crime down, breaking up fights in the bars. They're in and out of the bars. They'll know all the bartenders. They'll know all the bouncers. All the ones that'll want to keep on their good side are likely to pass them tips. Hey, some guys in there the other night talking about some ruins that might have been found out. And so now your PCs can go on furlough for a few days and go check this out because maybe there's something criminal going on there. Again, don't load it down with paladins. I wouldn't have any evil player characters being on the law enforcement side. True neutrals would be the best because they could be impartial judges. But lawful, some lawful neutral, lawful good. They don't all have to be that way though, because any formula crime drama you watch, there's various kinds of cops. The cynical ones, the eager ones, whatever, the smart ones, the old school ones. But I think you could have an amazing time. They could be, a couple of them could be working one of the gates one day and make a discovery in a wagon. They were on a routine search and sees the driver. Where's his stuff going to? The ideas, I think, are just endless. Now, do the players want to be cops, or do they want to be some kind of swashbuckling adventure with a badge on their chest that allows them to do stuff that maybe they shouldn't have done? That's totally up to you and your players and your assessment thereof. However, I think there are just countless possibilities in a campaign like this. Countless. In your opinion, besides weapons and armor, what piece of equipment is a must-have for a PC adventurer? Rope. Rope. Rope will never let you down. Well, inadvertent bad pun, sorry. But I mean, a good piece of stout rope that you carefully inspect, and replace when needed, etc., can get you out of more problems. Think of Indiana Jones' whip. Well, you've got a rope, and you can have a little hook on the end of it. That's okay, but it's a rope. Second most important thing I would think for an adventure is having a collapsible lantern that you can carry in your pack, and then when you go underground, you can click it back into place and put the candle in and light it and go about your exploring. That would be light is invaluable when you find yourself in dark. Okay. My friends and I recently got into Napoleonic. Oh, yeah, by the way, I'll preface this. I don't always just want to talk about, I will, but I also love to talk about other forms of gaming. And here we're going to talk about Napoleonics. My friends and I recently got into Napoleonic era war games, mostly Black Powder, due to having some extra time on our hands during COVID. What's your experience with Napoleonics, if any? Are there any favorite rules you would recommend? Also, what kind of game would you suggest for historical skirmish-based system? Okay, most of what I'm going to respond here is what I've heard and what's been recommended to me, because unfortunately I don't have the opportunity to play much of this. However, I have recently gotten into a Black Powder era game, probably by the same people if it's Warlord Games, because their line is called Black Powder. That's called Black Seas, and it's a sailing game with brigs and frigates. That's the beginning set. You can spend a lot of money and get others. But that looks to be, by the way, a brilliant set of rules, very easy to comprehend, and very realistic without being totally mystifying with things like wind gauges and things like that. They have a very simple way of handling that wind gauge, which, of course, in the age of sail, was an extremely important thing to have on your opponent. Is the wind gauge. Wind's working for you and against him, and smart captains will sail to keep the wind gauge, etc. And it's got some little fiddly bit ships, plastic ships you could put together and paint. But in Napoleonics, I played Napoleonic minis in college. I played a couple of Napoleonic minis games at conventions early before or right after I joined TSR. Game Designers Workshop came out with a whole system for Napoleonic Wars called System 7. And what they were basically doing was simulating 7mm figures with cardboard chits, company by company in the regiments, in the battalions. So there was a lot of breakdown there. Because the scale was so small, you could play a pretty big battle on a relatively small table. The rules were pretty. They were commensurate with the pieces in that they were not real granular, not real gritty. Oh, granular. Somebody later on uses that, and I thank them. Every once in a while, I appreciate a nice word used well, and it is later. Anyway, in CC, I picked it up. I have played the few Napoleonic games, minis that I've played. I think probably every one was a different set of rules. Possibly, anyway. And those mostly I played back in the 70s and 80s. I haven't played a Napoleonics game. No, I haven't played in one for a long time. I've watched some really good ones at some cons in recent years. Stop by for a half hour and watch the action. And again, System 7 was tiny scale, small tables. I do know there's a couple of English companies that put out skirmish level games that are very highly thought of in England, where skirmish gaming seems to be much more popular than it is here in the States. The Black Powder Boys, if their pike and shot and their other Black Powder era rules are as clean and simple as their Black Seas rules, I'd probably recommend looking at their stuff. It's been too long since I read a lot of English magazines to remember. Isn't there? There might be a company called Skirmish Games in England, and that might be what they do. I'm sorry, I don't know. That's the best I can give you. Again, if the Warlord Games stuff is, their land stuff is as interesting as their sea stuff, then they're probably pretty cool. All right. Excuse me. I'm creating a campaign for my players heavily involving illusion magic. Illusionists have always been the most interesting class, in my opinion. You can take illusion magic as far as your imagination can go, which is almost intimidating, but it's also not necessarily super deadly either. I think it's peak mischief and fun. First question, do you have a story for how this class came about? Second, do you have any stories of either a DM or player using illusion magic in a way that was hysterical or super clever that I can lift for my game. Ha ha. Okay. A world based on illusion would be a fever dream. It's not D&D anymore, in my opinion, if it was totally based on illusion. Back in the days of the little brown books in the little round box, illusions, the only story reference strongly dealing with illusion was a Robert E. Howard story, Conan or Cull, I'm not really sure, maybe one of each, where they, in the course of a brawl, alcohol was splashed across their face and they saw through the illusion. You see what's coming here? For adventure after adventure after adventure, my guys would, room after room, would go in, look around, and one of them would throw some whiskey or something in their face to see if it was an illusion, if they could see something that wasn't there. And this went on for a couple of weeks, and then it dawned on me that after the second or third time they did this, their eyes would be so red and swollen they couldn't see their nose on the end of their face. So that kind of killed that. If you have a protagonist that is an illusionist, you can have a lot of fun with red herrings and stuff not being what it appears to be. If it's a pervasive, recurring theme in a campaign, okay. But you can't base the whole thing on illusion. But you could have them running around in circles chasing their tail in the woods with a series of illusions. You could certainly do the same underground, but it'll only go so far, and once they begin to catch on, somebody will devise a way to see through them. It doesn't matter that there's nothing in the game right now, somebody will come up with something. Believe me, it'll happen. Supply and demand. All right. I have oh, there's several. I imagine the illusionist became official because somebody submitted the suggestion for a PC class called the Illusionist, and we printed an article in either Strategic Review or an Early Dragon, and then when it came time to sweep everything up together and restructure the game, it got stuck in there. There's nothing more hopeless than being a first level illusionist. Even with your little one spell, there's not a damn thing you can do. You can't hurt anybody, and if you don't scare them away, you're screwed. Therefore, I've never seen them as a viable PC. NPC, yes. PC, no. However, again, I'll go back. If your protagonists are illusionists, oh, the fun you can have depending upon their skill level. That lovely waterfall with the ferns growing around it, and the two lovely girls kneeling by the side doing laundry, brushing back the hair from their sweaty brows, and they go up there and find out it's a stagnant pond with two hags waiting to ambush and eat whoever comes up next. It's a possibility. Let's see what else is here. Okay. I'm wondering if you could give me some suggestions on something you recovered in your very first video, hit points. Could you please give a few examples of how you describe a hit that does damage? Okay, I'm going to stop here for a minute. A hit is not a hit. A hit is something that caused you to violently recoil, dive forward on your shoulder to avoid the sweeping blow, fall flat on your belly while the axe goes over where your head used to be. And all of these defensive measures, all these near misses, wear you down. And that was where hit points get subtracted from. They wear you down. Hit points are the measure of your ability to avoid a fatal blow. There's nothing about whether the fatal blow is cutting your leg off at the knee, lopping your head from your shoulders, or sticking an iron spear through your stomach. It's a fatal blow. It's an abstract. And I know this is difficult, particularly for some newer players, to wrap their head around an abstract that isn't quite completely abstract. So when the monster doesn't roll a hit, then whatever they did badly missed, or whatever. When they roll a hit, then they came close. Now, when you got 70 hit points, you can survive more close calls. When you have 31, you can't. The fatal blow can be anything. It can be any whatever. So we'll go on with the question. And I know it's an abstract that isn't quite. Okay, I'm asking because in the first video you gave us the wonderful insight that hit points were more or less a measure of your luck running out, and damage represents an attack that would have taken you down if you weren't lucky. Yes. I love this idea and I've been using it in my games ever since. However, I still get the occasional confused player who goes, "You just said the ogre's axe barely missed my head. Why do I take damage?" Well, explain when that question comes up what I just explained. Sit down at the beginning of the next game. Hi, let's go over a few things. I think we're straying. Whatever, call a meeting. Now this is what hit points are, guys. Let's keep this focused. And therefore, you can take a hit that doesn't kill you. It causes damage. Now, whether the damage is to your wind, to your abdomen, too many sucking it in or bending backwards like a limbo dancer. That's why Constitution gives you a few extra hit points. Yeah, there's a connection there. So a hit simply means it caused you to violently avoid. So no, the ogre's axe did not hit you in the head only because you violently threw yourself backwards and whatever, bounced off a wall. It doesn't matter. Whew. Okay, that's one less lucky move you're going to have. One less deflecting the fatality of the blow into something less than fatal. All right. It can simply be a big, huge overhand smite, and you parry it, and his blade slides down the hilt of your blade, and yeah, you take some damage because it was a jolt, it was a strain on your arm, your wrist, your hand, whatever. Um, sit down and have this conversation with your group, um, and explain once again what the abstract, it isn't quite abstract, really means. And I think maybe your players will be less confused. Let's go on here. Um, a hit is caused you to evade, to block, um, to raise your shield, and it jolted you, it jarred you, it took away from some of your stamina, and it depleted your wind a little bit, and it created a little exhaustion. It's a miss doesn't require you to do that, but you can only block so many on your shield before your shield gets cloven in two, or your arm gets tired, or whatever, and eventually a hit becomes a literal contact of a weapon on your body. And that's the best way I can it's the best way I can think of to describe, again, a rather nebulous topic that is just so tremendously important to the concept of the game. Okay, what about advanced D&D made it better for public games? Basic and original seems easier to manage when playing with strangers. Yes and no. When there were several reasons for advanced. Number one was the attempt to design and market a product that Gary didn't have to pay Dave any money for, because it wasn't the same game. Well, he lost that lawsuit. Why was it better for public consumption? Because, again, I go back to the fact that we were running these enormous D&D tournaments at these conventions around the Midwest and raising enormous sums of money. And if everybody played by the same rules as written, there's no arguments. In the early days, when we didn't have advanced, we had meetings with volunteer DMs, and we tried to set the tone of how we wanted the adventure run. Don't give them any slack here. Make them play it straight. Feed them information. That kind of thing. How to score points. Straight up a kill is one thing, but all the things we had to try and go through with all those. And so what we had is 25 or 30 very subjective grading sheets turned in. And so we had people grousing because they were talking about it afterwards and found out that they got farther into a given adventure than another group. They didn't make it to the next round, and the other group did. And there were arbitrary points to be awarded by the DMs. And so here it was, it's advanced D&D, play it this way, everybody runs the same. Now, what you do at home is all different. But what we wanted at the convention was, okay, you come to play in a convention, this is the way you can expect it to work. These are the amount of hit dice you can expect an orc to have. No surprises. People were paying real money to play in these games. So they deserved a fair and level playing field. That's why it was better in public. Now, if you're talking about a con where various DMs sign up to run a game that the name of which has no meaning to anybody because it's a homebrew or something they did themselves, then you can expect the unexpected when you sit down to play because you're going to go play at their table, their style. Several years ago at a GaryCon is the only time I've ever been challenged in the middle of my game by somebody who told me I couldn't do something that way. And actually I could, and after he interrupted the game a couple, 3 times, I convinced him that if he wasn't having any fun, he ought to leave. And that can't happen if it's being rules as written. So that's why it's better for a public consumption type tournament. It's a level playing field. Okay, and now here's the gentleman that gave me, I assume it's a gentleman, gave me the my new favorite word. In your experience, what is the minimum and the maximum granularity that's fun for tracking equipment? Where one end is not tracking anything and just assuming players have equipment that makes sense. The other end is if you didn't write it down, you had socks and you don't have socks. What do you think the most fun for amount of bookkeeping? Where do you think most fun for amount of bookkeeping lives? Okay. Now, I'll give 2 answers here. At a con, I don't worry about that stuff. I assume, because I only run games with pre-gens, and I tell them up front, it's assumed that you have all the standard operating stuff except no 10-foot poles. But you got pitons, and you got the hammers and chisels and oil, and I don't care about that. But when you got something odd like a sack full of mice or a bag of marbles or, whatever, then I have them write it down on the sheet before the beginning of the game. And when they say, well, I'm pulling out my jar of peanut butter and smearing it on the alligator's nose, I go, what peanut butter? And they show me their sheet, and there's peanut butter written on there. That's the way I handle it. Now, if I was running a different type of adventure, if I was in a campaign, again, I wouldn't sweat it all that much. I assume they have iron rations. I assume they have water flasks. Okay, I assume that. I get no joy. I get no joy from keeping track of that. I don't worry about how many sling stones the slinger has thrown. Because I figure if he's a smart slinger as he's going along, he's picking up anything he sees that looks like it'll make a good sling stone. I don't count arrows unless it's a prolonged fight. And, if the archer has shot off 40 arrows, and I can't imagine a fight going that long, but well, then I might, say something, and I might encourage the archer to dash around and try to find some arrows. And if the archer's now shooting back the other guy's arrows, well, depending upon who the other guy is, they may be worse, more poorly made, or they might be better. I don't know. But granularity, or grit, as I'm also known to say, is really how realistic do you want to get. Encumbrance is that's a whole different ball game. I generally don't sweat encumbrance until I have to. No, you can't pick up the 38,000 copper pieces and carry it home with you. Sorry, won't work. But when they're picking this up and picking that up, until it becomes some kind of magpie event where they're just picking up shinies everywhere they go, I don't get into it. Now, if it was an overland campaign, in a campaign and an overland leg of it, okay. Again, do you want to make them, if you're going to play for random weather and they get blizzarded in and it lasts for 3 weeks, do you really want to have them all starve? It kind of suck. Sorry, guys, you all starved last week after the adventure. You froze to death. But hey, that's just me. What is the penalty of wearing more than the limit of enchanted rings? Can higher level magic users wear more rings? without penalties. No. No. That's min-maxing. There's a reason to prevent min-maxing. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if I had a ring of animal control and then a ring of speak with dead, and wow, now I got 8 spells contained in rings that frees up 8 slots in my head. No, that's min-maxing. Now, let's look at it from another way. All those sorceries wrapped into those rings. Oh, my evil black little heart can think of all manner of horrible things to happen to the wearer's hands and fingers as all those magics interplay with each other and perhaps create something that takes them over, makes them go crazy. Gary said, only so many because of that reason. Now, we never said how many scrolls you can carry, so we let it go. Scrolls are one-shots. Rings are multiples. And when you do have a legitimate ring and you use up the charges, yeah, it should be really expensive to get it, recharged because of the amazing value of that ring in everyday use. I was wondering if you knew why the spell progression of clerics in OD&D is the way it is. They seem to follow a regular pattern for when they gain access to the lower level spells, first at level 2, second at level 4, but then they gain both 3rd and 4th at level 6 and gain 5th at level 7. The inexplicable asymmetry always seemed odd to me, and I'm guessing it didn't sit well with Gary because he changed clerics for AD&D, both smoothing the progression and giving them spells at first level. Could it have been a quirk of Arneson's rules? No. Arneson had no rules to speak of. Arneson had concepts and ideas, and Gary sat down and hammered it out into graphs and tables, for the most part. Clerics have become the de facto medics or corpsmen for their ability to heal, and the fact that everybody considers that their clerics carrying a whole knapsack full of healing potions. What you're referring to is an experimentation on just how the class should be played, how powerful it should be or shouldn't be. I don't in my world, I don't even play it like that anymore. In my world, clerics don't have spells, they say prayers. And when they make a new level, they already know all the prayers that go with that level. They're still limited into how many prayers they can say in a day because it takes intense concentration when they're establishing their link with their deity. They can only do it so many times, and they can only do it so many times of such and such an intensity that looks exactly like the spell chart would. But I don't make clerics and pick them in advance. So now they have all their spells at their fingertips. They can still only use so many in a day of certain levels, but they have them all on their fingertips. Wow. Clerics just became a whole lot more interesting, in my opinion, and are no longer just the corpsmen. Yeah, they were tinkered with, they were fooled around with. A lot of the stuff that we published that Gary put in Strategic Review, and then I put in, and then we put in early issues of the Dragon, were experimentations. Let's try it this way, let's try it that way, and let's see how it comes out. That's how it ended up, is how it got changed for AD&D. Okay, and then a further addition onto that. Beck-me clerics also have to survive the second level to cast spells, but after that, their spell progression is quite even. Well, I can't speak to Beck-me. I wasn't there. I had nothing to do with writing it. Again, every edition that came after first edition AD&D that was written by Gary, or written with Gary or under Gary's direction, was a tinkering, a refinement. When Gary finally left TSR for good, look at what he went, and he did Castle Zygag, and he did Legendary Adventures, radically different than his original creation of D&D, his co-creation. It evolves. The game design evolved. When Frank Menser did the Beck-me stuff, he did that for the same reason that I did the original first supplements, to address a need in the hobby, to address certain things that were happening or going on or whatever. Just like home rules, house rules, I believe, are the natural evolution of role-playing into what you and your group like to do. Okay, that's all the questions for today. Fat Dragon Games, check them out. North Texas RPG Con, coming up soon, first week in June. If you can't go, sign up and play virtually. I'm going to be running at least 3 games that I know of virtually. It's a great con. I wish I was going down there, but with everything that's going on and the crazy people on the airlines that won't obey the rules, I don't want to, be flying to Dallas and end up in Phoenix because some moron wouldn't wear his mask and they had to divert. Whatever. So I'm not. But I'll be there in spirit because I have great affection for Doug, who puts on the con every year, and I wish I was going to be there, but I can't. I'm still doing Wheel of Blame online, so if your group's looking for an interesting diversion one evening, get in touch. I got a birthday party I'm doing sometime in July, I guess. It's a birthday gift. I don't know. See what else. I got a couple others on the irons in the fire. In the meantime, get your shots. Now that we're allowed to go out a little bit, keep your mask. We actually went out to a microbrewery last night with 2 friends and sat outdoors. Took our masks off when the flights came, and it was fun. So just follow the guidelines, stay safe, and we'll all meet again at the next con where everybody goes. And until then, do dada govi.
Oh, hello. I'm still figuring out when this thing starts. Welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, a curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when the rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's a curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite a feller, a curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard brain. ESR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Titan with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.